But I wanted to just speak about 4 things today. I don't have a lot of time, none of us do really, but I wanted just to kind of talk a little bit about the distinction between ethics and morality. Oftentimes, those 2 words are confused, and I think one of the things that I think is important in this discussion that we're having today is the importance of distinctions of terminology. What are we talking about? So I'm going to just kind of make that distinction first, and then just that'll segue me into talking a little bit about ethical theories, 2 minutes talking about some of the different ethical theories, which will then lead me into talking about values. Okay? I think values are really important here. What are the values that are underlying our discussions today, underlying Bill 52, etc. And then finally, in the last 5 minutes or so, talk about some ethical tools of analysis. The thing about ethics is ethics kind of drives people crazy because you call in an ethicist and they never tell you what to do. Because that's not the job of an ethicist. The job of an ethicist is really to raise questions, I guess a bit like the psychologist this morning. It's really to try to raise questions, but even more important, try to make sure that all the voices are on the table, that certain voices have not been left out of the equation, that all the voices have been heard. So that's one of the tasks of ethics. So I want to now just come for a minute to this issue of terminology, ethics and morality. And again, I think the importance here is that we can't just rely on our common sense understanding of these terms. Let's think about what they are. So first of all, ethics. What is ethics? Ethics is the conversation that we have with ourselves, with others, about the future, about the question that we ask when we're concerned with ethical reflection is, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? So Bill 52 has introduced a new dimension to this ethical deliberation about my own life, about the life of my loved ones, about end-of-life care. So what are we going to do? This is really what we're all engaged in thinking about today, I think. So the goal of ethics then is intricately related to promoting the good of whatever it is we're doing. Yet what is the good? How do we understand the good in relation to end-of-life care? In relation to the decisions we are faced with at end-of-life care? So this is the concern of ethics. And again, it's extremely practical. It's extremely concrete. It's not about something out there, some abstract theory that's going to tell me what's good about what I'm going to do here and now or in the future. Ethics is extremely concrete. Morality is a little bit different. Morality has to do with precepts. So what I mean by that is sort of these general rules that we use that help to regulate our behavior and our thought. So, they come to us in the form of advice, recommendations, instructions, even principles to a certain extent. So they teach us, morality teaches us in a sense how to do well, when a task has been undertaken. So there's an important distinction then between morality and ethics that I think sheds light on our understanding of the good. So there are these 2 components that promote doing well in what we undertake. First, that we have a clear understanding of the goal of our actions, so that's where ethics kicks in. And then secondly, knowing what rules to follow to attain, in order to attain that goal. So they work together, ethics and morality. But what's important is that ethics, in a sense, ethics takes priority over morality. Ethics, in a sense, has to be the lead horse. Morality can't be the lead horse, in a sense, because our morality is always shifting. Okay? Like, for example, 200-300 years ago, society, not our society, but in the States, slavery was legal. Okay? So it was moral to own a slave. It's not moral to own slaves anymore. So morality is always shifting and changing. So we need to be continually asking questions about what is the good? What direction am I heading into? So the primacy then of ethics over morality, that ethics has to kind of take the lead in a sense. They're not oppositional, they work together. So I think they have a kind of complementary relationship. Yet moral norms must always be kept subordinate to the ethical aim. So here this kind of segues me into talking a little bit about ethical theories. Probably most of you have heard about, deontology or obligation ethics or deontology, which is really, we must obey the law, we must obey the rules. So what am I going to do? Well, what does the law tell me to do? What do the rules tell me to do? That's what is the right thing to do. But there's also another type of ethics called teleology or consequentialism, consequential-based ethics. So there you ask a very different question. You ask, what are the consequences of my actions? Okay? So we're not so concerned with the laws and the rules and regulations. We're more concerned with, what are the consequences of my actions? There's other types of theory, ethical theories. There's rights-based theory. Very much this Bill 52 comes out of a rights-based theory, okay? Because it has to do with individual rights and our right to physician-assisted death if we want it. There's also virtue-based ethics, etc., ethics of care. So these are ethical theories that, again, provide information in the deliberation process. They provide information, they don't tell us what to do. Okay? Now, I just wanted to speak for a minute now about values. If we look at the actual Bill 52, the Act itself, it says that the purpose of the Act, and I'm just going to quote this, the purpose of this Act, Bill 52, is to ensure that end-of-life patients are provided with care that is respectful of their dignity and their autonomy. The Act establishes the rights of such patients, as well as the organization of and a framework for end-of-life care, so that everyone may have access throughout the continuum of care to quality care that is appropriate to their needs, including prevention and relief of suffering. In addition, the Act recognizes the primacy of freely and clearly expressed wishes with respect to care, in particular by establishing an advanced medical directives regime. So my question then as an ethicist, when I read this, when I think about this, is what are the underlying values in a statement like this? What are the underlying values that are operative in this end of life, this bill that is related to end of life? Well, some of the values that I heard are human dignity, autonomy. Autonomy is very much a principle-based ethics. Some of you may be familiar, people who are in the medical profession, you're probably familiar with the principles of bioethics. And the first and most important principle is autonomy. That's sort of the one that, if you go into a hospital, that's always the principle that takes precedence, autonomy. So important in our society. Rights of individuals, and we're talking particularly the rights of the patient. So, here we have a rights-based ethics. Another value that I heard is the value of freedom. This idea of having the freedom to clearly express what our wishes are. Yet another question I have is, what are the values that are operative in the statement that are not explicitly in the document? The underlying values in a sense. And one of them, I would hazard to say, is this kind of the value of relationships. It might seem strange when the focus is on the individual rights and autonomy, and yet, we have 150 people in this room today wrestling together with this very important decision and bill that's been brought in, and that we've got to figure out what we're going to do with it. Many speakers this morning talked about the importance of dialogue, of trying to figure out how we're going to move forward with this. So this idea of relationship. Yesterday, something like 200 patients were transported from the Royal Victoria Hospital to the new hospital on the Glen site. When you think about that, that's amazing. It's all about relationships and the network of relationships. So I think that this bill, it kind of hides that a bit. I think it's there, and I think it's something important that we keep in mind. Now, one of the things that when I talked about tools of analysis that ethics provides, one of the tools of analysis is to think about values at different levels. Okay? So, for example, if we think about the values that are operative for the individual facing this kind of decision. Okay? that an individual who is in such intense pain and suffering that they can't bear to think about their life continuing any longer. So those values are at the individual level, and they're important. They're important. They're very important, and they're good. Those values are good. It's important that we are respectful of individual values. But the second level of values is the values of a society. Okay? And sometimes the value of an individual and the value of a society sometimes clash. Okay? You know, and we all live in a society where our individual values are sometimes, in a sense, put on the back burner because we recognize the good of a higher level of value, the good of society. So I might want to get to Ottawa, in an hour, but I'd have to go 200 kilometers an hour. But if I do that, I'm probably not only going to kill myself, but maybe I'd take out a few other people with me. So I recognize the value of obeying the law, living with other people in a sense. So that has to be taken into consideration in relation to Bill 52. I mean, that would be a question I would want to be explored more. What are the effects of paying so much attention to the individual value? What are the effects of that on social values, on society itself? However, that's not even maybe the most significant level. There's another level of value that I wanted to talk about, and it's the value of deeper questions. The question, for example, of what direction is this taking us in? What direction is this bill and what we're going to do? What direction is this taking in terms of human flourishing? Is this a direction that would really bring about human flourishing? Also questions about the meaning of suffering. And I'm not talking about pain. Pain and suffering are different things. There is no meaning in pain. Let's get rid of them, if we can. But suffering, suffering is different. People from, time immemorial have talked about that suffering as something to teach us. And we heard something about that this morning also. So, asking that question, asking questions about the meaning of life. What is the meaning of a life? And so here, then, we need to think about, an attitude towards how we move forward with Bill 52. We need to think about this in relation to, how this structure promotes human flourishing, how it promotes liberation, and how it promotes, I'll use this word, transcendence. It's not necessarily a religious word. Transcendence just means this orientation of human beings towards something more than themselves, which is really what human beings are. So if we talk then about these third level questions, we might talk about this issue of the slippery slope. And somebody mentioned that argument this morning. This is an ethical term that people use a lot. And what they mean by that is, if you open the door a little ways, it's going to gradually, just become more and more prevalent. So, for example, think about this. I mean, one of the things that was mentioned this morning is that there has to be capacity. The person who requests physician-assisted death has to have capacity to request it. So, therefore, people who are cognitively impaired or intellectually challenged, or people who or children don't have the same right as somebody who is an adult who has capacity. So that would maybe logically might lead us to ask this question: if death can be a benefit for patients in condition X who can request it, why can it not equally benefit patients in condition X who cannot request it? I mean, that's a justice issue to me. So what's going to stop that? That's my question, and that's the slippery slope argument. So we set something in place, and then all these other possibilities emerge. Right? We start thinking, well, yeah, that doesn't seem just. That means that certain people have rights, other people don't have rights. So it's this kind of slippery slope thing, slippery slope argument. Now, why I call these third level questions is because, again, they have to do not just with myself or not just with my social group, but sort of the long-term direction that we're moving in. Okay? And I don't think we can just leave it up to our grandchildren to take care of that future. I think that we need to think about it as much as possible. You know, and some of the things that we might think about in relation to third level questions, for example, Aristotle once said, we become what we habitually do. We become what we habitually do. So we put in place actions where, and you know, one of the doctors this morning said, it's actually killing people. That's what it is. Let's call it that. And again, I'm not trying to say come down on one side or the other, but I just think it's important that we know what we're talking about when we're talking about this. And there's something quite different between withdrawing treatment and allowing death to take its course and actively putting a person to death, in a sense. So that's important that we acknowledge that difference. And then the concern about the vulnerable people, where, you know, I mean, this is a big concern that comes up, but I think ethics, and I think we need to be assured that as far as possible that we can set in place certain oversights that protect the vulnerable from the possible, moving this, physician-assisted death in a direction that might actually, do away with people just because they happen to be a certain condition or in a certain condition, that kind of idea. I just wanted to read you a short quote, and then I'll kind of finish there. It's a quote from a philosopher named Bernard Lonergan. He's also a theologian. And he says, the good of society as a whole does not exist independently of the good of its parts. So the good of a society and the good of its parts, so the first and second level of the good. He says, and the lives of its members, its individuals, are thought to be all the richer since they partake in a good that transcends themselves. In this way, the common good conditions the concrete realization of human dignity, a dignity that is, to be sure, both personal and social. So I just want to leave you with some of those ideas of thinking about this. I think we all need to think about this, not just in terms of individual rights, not just in terms of autonomy, but really thinking about what is human dignity. It's used a lot, but what is it? And I suggest it has something to do with our relationship with each other, the relational dimension of being human. And I think that has something to do with what we're all here today about and discussing this. So I think, in my view, I think it's important that we keep some of these tools of analysis in mind as we go forward with this discussion. Thanks a lot.